Mm-hmm. Good morning and welcome. Thank you very much for being here with us today, physically and online. My name is Anna Kasimati. I'm head of Creative Europe Media Desk, and we are here at this event calling Traveling Docs: How to Foster Sustainable Film Production for Documentaries. And we are going to discuss about the challenges and the incentives that we have for this. I would like to thank Thessaloniki Film Festival, Greek Film Center, and all my colleagues at Creative Europe Media Desk that we organized together this event. Without further ado, I give the floor to Emma Doxiadi, our moderator. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to Creative Europe Media, Thessaloniki Film Festival, and the Greek Film Center for hosting this very important panel. I'm a filmmaker, Greek filmmaker, and co-founder of the initiative Film SOS. I'm going to just introduce briefly our topic and then introduce our panelists. So the topic is Traveling Docs: How to Foster Sustainable Film Production for Documentaries, Challenges and Incentives. We will talk a lot about what sustainability is, how there are many definitions for it, and how it can find its way into all aspects of putting together a film. So without further ado, I will introduce our speakers today. Next to me in person is Tim Wagendorp, Sustainability Coordinator at the Flanders Audiovisual Fund. Welcome, Tim. Then we're moving to Julia Tordai and Zsofia Szemeredy, forgive me if I pronounce it wrong, of GreenEyes Film Production, a sustainability consultancy working across the film, TV, and media sector. Next, we have Dr. Judith Keilbach, Associate Professor in Media and Culture Studies at Utrecht University. And last but not least, we have Alberto Battocchi, Film Commissioner at Trentino Film Commission. Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to be here with you today. So before we move into the individual segments of the panel, I'm just going to give everyone a brief overview of how the panel will move today. Firstly, just to introduce the topic of sustainability. Again, as mentioned previously, it is a topic that, it is a word that holds many different definitions. But one thing is for sure that sustainability is something that concerns us all. And as far as the media or film industry is concerned, it certainly is something that, it is a story that concerns everybody and has everybody as its audience. I will hand it over to Tim for his presentation, and then we will move on to each of the panelists, where they will speak more about the specific area in which they are focused in their work. And then at the end, we will have time to open the conversation to the audience for questions and to discuss a little more what comes up. So off to you, Tim.
I'm waiting for my screen. Okay. Thank you for being here. Thank you for inviting me. I was asked to talk about sustainable documentaries, but yesterday evening I was sitting in a cinema next door and I decided to change my topic into superpowers. Why? I was waiting for the film to start and I was watching this image of the documentary festival. And when I was looking at it, I realized that these documentary makers, they have a superpower. They have the power to look at the world with other eyes, to find stories, to tell stories, and to bring them to society. And it can be stories about environment, about animals, about the world, about love, about war, about peace, about any topic. And in a way, the stories you tell and bring, they change people like me. And they changed me yesterday and the day before when I was sitting at this festival. So let's talk about superpowers instead of sustainability. I only have a limited amount of time, so I want to talk about three things with you today. First thing is about, as Emma said, when you talk about sustainability, what do you really mean? There is so many words are used randomly in all the discussions. Some people talk about green, but green is a color. Some people talk about circular economy, about reusing, closing material loops. Some people talk about carbon, CO2, which is a climate gas. Some people mention bio and fair trade, which mentions the ethical impact or the ethical aspects of production. I buy a T-shirt, where was it made? Sometimes people say about, I'm making an ecological film, but ecology is about plants and animals and habitats and ecosystems. So is that what we want to talk about? Sometimes people say, no, it's people, planet, profit, and the balance or the relation between choices in economics, in social aspects, and how it affects the planet. But I want to show you a slide about the Sustainable Development Goals. Probably you will already know them, but this is my moral compass. I work as a sustainability expert in Flanders, in Belgium, for a film fund. And all the projects that are funded by our fund, they are asked or they are coached by me to translate sustainability for their projects. And I use these SDGs, these 17 goals, and they are developed by the United Nations. They are a much broader human way to look at sustainability. They cover fields like climate and energy and waste. They also talk about poverty, about peace, about consumption, about diversity, equity. So for me, this is my moral compass. And what I want to stress with this is, whatever you choose, it might be green, fair trade, SDGs, whatever you choose, use them as your compass and know what you're talking about. And you can't focus on everything, but just focus on what's important for you, for your project, for your personal life. And for me, when I talk about sustainability, you can put a number on it, but for me it's much more about considering the impacts of the choices you make in your life, in your job, wherever you want to choose. But don't make it an accident. It's about what do I decide today and how will it affect my children, my grandchildren. It can be on set, it can be traveling, it can be in a festival or your private life. So that was point one. Secondly, when you talk about sustainability, where does it start and where does it end? Shouldn't we think about the start of the value chain? Are you, when you were in school, being taught to become a professional in the film industry, were you taught about sustainability? Is this taught today at school, yes or no? And it can be about very broad aspects, but it can also be very job specific. When you're studying to become a carpenter for set construction, are you taught about eco-design and about nails and glues and paint, yes or no? And for me, it's not only about embedding this knowledge in education, but also working with people like Judith, who will present later on in the panel, but also to work with students and to really cooperate with other people and use the knowledge from scientists and students to improve our work and to inspire us all. When you look at the rest of the value chain, it's about storytelling. It's about your superpower as a storyteller, as a documentary maker. Now we can use that to change society. It's about cash, about money. That's where my job is focusing at. It's also about production and the choices you make when you start filming and we're traveling around. And last but not least, it's when we consume, because you can write a sustainable story and make it sustainable at production level, but also the way we use it towards society and how people consume, how they watch Netflix, and the choices you make in your cinema or at your festival, like here in Thessaloniki, they all have an impact. And I will mention them later on in my presentation. I first want to show you this still, talking about storytelling. Flotsam is a game that we funded a few years ago with our public fund in Flanders, the Flanders Audiovisual Fund. And within the game, you have to collect waste in the sea and create a new society from it. I saw this and I had a meeting with the producer and I told them, you made a Trojan horse because you talk on the private screen of thousands of gamers about the importance of saving the ocean, cleaning the ocean, and reusing that material. He looked at me saying, I just wanted to make something cool. And so the question is, how can we make sure that people that write stories are aware of the role they play in storytelling? And it can be very subtle, like in this case it's almost like product placement, but it can also be by the topics we bring in documentaries and on how they change the world. And it's also because I spoke to the producer of Flotsam. I said, maybe you should talk to other policymakers with waste agencies, environmental agencies, because they can become the partner in your game. So it's not only about what do we show on screen, but also when you write scripts or when you write stories, how much effort will it take to make them? If you write Superman has to travel to South Africa, then you should realize that you really have to travel to South Africa with your cast and your crew to make that film. So it's about that awareness, and I'm not telling you not to travel, I'm telling you to think and use your brain before you decide anything. That's about the storytelling, and we as a public fund, we don't tell people what to write about. That's called censorship. We just try to inspire people to make meaningful, touching, warm films. Second in that value chain is about the cash. And our fund, we decided in 2013, since we give away taxpayers' money to productions, we said, okay, it's a formal obligation to think about sustainability when you receive our money. And it is my job working in that fund to translate that towards the practice on set. And it's like giving pocket money to your kids. When I give kids to my pocket money and I say to them it's not for cigarettes, I hope they listen. And so in a degree, we use our financial support as the leverage towards sustainability. And Alberto will mention that role for sure during the panel about the role we play as public institutions in this challenge. Moving up in the value chain to production, I represent Flanders. The Flemish market of films is small. We try to calculate, using a carbon calculator, the impact of productions. A big Flemish movie has a budget of about 2 million euros. It represents an impact of 73 tons of carbon. It's a very abstract number because it doesn't say a lot to people. But imagine 10 families worth of impact in 1 year, traveling, heating your house, airco, watching Netflix, eating, drinking, having sports, all that together for 1 year for 10 families, the same impact. So it's an enormous burden when you produce something. And it is my job to help people understand the impacts of different choices, logistic choices on set, generators, traveling, eating, drinking, waste. And Zsofia and Judith, they will definitely speak about these logistic choices. But for me, there again, the experience we have is sometimes you need to spend more money, but in many cases, by using your brain, you can also save a lot of money on your budget. And I think, again, talking about superpowers, I have the superpower to have public money, but you also have the superpower to have a brain and to use it when you make choices with your budget. And last on the topic, on the value chain, it's about the cinemas and the festivals and the consumption of all the productions. It's about the choices you make, like here in the festival. Do you drink a beer from a plastic cup or a glass? It's about the logistic choices about, is my roof heated, is my generator, is my projector sustainable, yes or no? It's about these logistic things, but it's also about the fact that I'm sitting here, and the fact that you as a festival decide, no, let's put this on the agenda, let's talk about this because it's important, and let's inform our public, not only in the acts in our bars and restaurants, but also in the choices we make on the content of our screens and of the discussions we host in the margin of the festival. So thanks for having this discussion. And third, and the third superpower, I want to take you back to your 1820s maybe, the moment when you decided to go for a driver's license. I don't know who in this room has a driver's license. You can put up your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. But when you think back about that moment and what it took to have that driver's license, it was awareness. I want to achieve this. I want to have a license. It was about theory. I need a book with all the practices. You needed guidance, somebody who taught you to practice. You needed a lot of motivation to keep on practicing and keep on doing the tests. You needed cash to pay a car and to fuel it up. You needed law to allow you to be a student in the street. And at the end, you had an exam. And for me, this metaphor of the driver's license, it's very similar to the challenge of sustainability within the industry, because it's a new competence. And if you don't have awareness, or you don't have the logistics, or the money, or the knowledge, or the motivation of your team, or the policy and the funding, then you will not be successful in your challenge. So for me, it's not one magic solution, but it's a complex mix of all these different elements, and we should be aware of that. And it's not only about games or about feature films, but it's the entire value chain and how we make these choices and how we create that mix of different elements and different solutions. And by using that superpower, I think that, and I think there you can be my superhero, by the stories you bring and the choices you make when you make these stories, we can save the only shooting location of that exists, and that's our planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Next, we're going to move to you, Judith. Dr. Keilbach is going to touch upon a few facts on the climate crisis and film-related numbers, discuss difficulties of defining a film's environmental impact, and the current challenges of a transition toward greener productions.
All right. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me. I'm really curious about your festival. I have to say, it seems to be really great since it makes Tim talk about superpowers. So congratulations on that. So I'm a scholar in media studies, and actually I have my PhD was about documentary content. So I'm really happy to be, let's say, at the Documentary Film Festival right now. So usually what media scholars or media studies scholars do is they analyze films. They focus, for example, on narrative strategies or aesthetic qualities of movies. And for me, I have to say, in view of the climate crisis, I somehow felt that this is not enough. So I really started to get interested in environmental topics. And while the effects of the climate crisis are already, can be experienced already. So we all know about less stable and more extreme weather, for example, and I'm pretty sure you all know or read reports about tipping points or that we have less than 8 years time to prevent global warming, about 1.5 degrees. Or I'm pretty sure you also know that the expectations are that the sea level will rise by 30 centimeters to 2.5 meters by 2100, which is within the next 80 years. So there are a number of strategies to deal with climate change, and they're usually distinguished between mitigation and adaptation. So adaptation, I guess I'm pretty sure you all know that, is that we adapt to unavoidable impact of the climate change and to try to become climate resilient. So for example, in the Netherlands, we try to increase the height of dikes to hold back water. It's about building houses that are disaster resilient because they use different materials. It's about planting trees to reduce summer heat in cities or to prevent water runoff in farmlands, and so on and so on. So these are all measures to reduce climate-related risks. But this is, of course, nothing that filmmakers can do. What filmmakers usually do is they try to mitigate. So it's about to reduce the emission of greenhouse gases. As far as I know, we will have a number of examples how you can do that. So it's about logistical chain decisions, as Tim already mentioned. So I want to talk a little bit about what we know about the environmental impact of film production. So how much CO2, for example, does the production of a movie emit? And this is a very difficult question because productions are, as you know, not standardized. So each film shooting is different, and we have to decide if we talk about a studio production or a movie that is shot on multiple locations. In the worst case scenario, for example, locations that are scattered all over the world. And of course, it's a difference if you talk about big Hollywood movies or documentary films with a small production team. So about the numbers, there are calculations that differ very much. So already 15 years ago, academics from Los Angeles calculated that Hollywood's emission is similar to the US aviation industry, which we, I think, consider as a big industry with a lot of emissions. So they calculated and said, okay, this is pretty similar. There are more recent studies about Great Britain, that come to the conclusion that the British film and television industry emits each year around 149,760 tons of CO2, or one big film production emits 2,840 tons. So as Tim already mentioned, these numbers somehow don't mean nothing, so you have to find equivalents. And the equivalent in that case is that one film in Great Britain is equivalent to the energy use of 342 houses within a year, and that the emission of the whole British film industry within 1 year is equivalent to the energy use of 18,035 homes, so 18,000 homes. That's a lot, and you've heard already Tim's numbers, so it's obvious that in other countries the emission is much lower because the productions are much smaller. Flanders Audiovisual Funds, or the films that are financed by the Flanders Audiovisual Funds, emit an average of 73 tons, as Tim already mentioned, and it's the same in the Netherlands. And so we are talking about the energy use of around 10 homes per year. And this is only the production, so we are not even talking about film distribution at that moment. Let me have a look how much time I have left. All right, so if you as a filmmaker want to know how much CO2 your film emits, there are calculators. This is also what Tim already mentioned. For example, the one by the Flanders Audiovisual Funds. There's a new calculator in development for the European film industry. And what you will see when you start to calculate the emission, you will see that most emission is due to transport. So one could argue, let's make more use of digital productions, which is of course not an option for documentary filmmakers, I'm aware of that, but I'm bringing this up because it leads us to another topic, and this is the topic of digitization. So usually we assume that digitization is more eco-friendly, because we don't have all the transport. However, we really have to be aware of the really enormous energy consumption of digitization. So think, for example, of the computers that need to be powered, of all the servers on which images are stored, and all the data centers through which distribution takes place. So I'm also very interested in the footprint of not only in the footprint, sorry, of production, which is one thing and which you can calculate, but I'm also very much interested in the digital footprint of distribution, and that's really another story, because this is really hard to get numbers and figures. There are studies that calculate the emission of video streaming, and the numbers are really very different. They differ between 55 gram CO2 per hour video streaming to 441, which is about driving a car for 3.5 kilometers. So these 441 gram doesn't sound very much. But if you think about how many people are watching movies online, then digital distribution really adds up, no matter if it's only 55 gram or 401. So the difference in such calculations result on the one hand from the underlying data that differs. So this is about the energy mix that are used to calculate the data, but they point also to a very different or another problem, which is a methodology. And the question is, and this is also something that Tim already addressed, the question is, so what do we include in such calculations? So is it enough to consider only, let's say, the consumption of electricity when we talk about the environmental footprint of online distribution of films? So do we only look at electricity, or should we maybe also include the raw material that is needed to build, let's say, data centers, or to manufacture computers and servers and all the screens on which we as end users watch films. So these are some of the problems or questions that academics in the humanities are addressing. So the humanities, you know, this is the one discipline that only asks questions and never has solutions. So some of the questions are indeed, so what do these numbers mean? What do we include in all these calculations? Do we also have to consider all the screens on which we are watching movies, and so on, so on. There are more questions that I would like to introduce, but since my time is up, I guess I just stop here and hope that we can address the other things in the discussion.
Thank you so much for this, Judith. So next is Zsofia and Julia, who are going to do a double act of presenting their presentation together, and they will talk to us a little bit more about the necessary steps one ought to take in accomplishing a sustainable production, and how important it is to act as early as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, nice to meet you, everyone. We're very sorry we can't be there in person, but thank you for inviting us, and we will talk in tandem a little bit about the practical side of everything that Tim and Judith were speaking about. So we're just going to follow their footsteps, say a couple of words about our company. So GreenEyes, with GreenEyes we work on tentpole projects and studio projects. It means we worked with Marvel, Disney, all these kind of productions, but we haven't worked on documentaries, so we're going to put this out there. But it's important to mention because some of these studios have really big documentary arms folded underneath them. So I'm just going to share my screen and show you a slide that we've put together recently, which will help you with the context, why it's important to start paying attention to sustainability a little bit more in the whole filmmaking world. Basically, you can see Disney there, 2030, they're in National Geographic, so it falls underneath a big documentary arm. Warner Media, that will be joined with Discovery now, 2035, they have the carbon neutral goals. So again, that's quite important. Apple and Netflix that also make really big documentaries sometimes, they also have their commitment goals. Netflix is actually the most ambitious one with 2022. So if you're lucky enough to work with any of them, you can call them out on this. You can ask them, just to email your person who you're in touch with and check with them that we know you've got a commitment goal. We know you're sustainably minded, and it's all in the media. So what can we do to actually make our film more sustainable and abide by the rules as well? So we wanted to show you this, basically why it's important in the current market to be more sustainable. And then this is just what Judith was talking about as well. So I'm just going to pass it on to Julia, but we're going to rush through this because it's a little bit similar, but puts it in context.
Yeah, actually on the right, you see one of the latest projects we worked on, and it was a £40 million budget movie, and the CO2 footprint of it was 1,858 tons of CO2 emission. And below that, you see a pie chart, and you see that the accommodation one of the biggest emitters, and then travel and transport. It was actually a UK cruise, so a lot of people just flew into Hungary because the shooting was in Hungary. So travel and transport emits a lot. And then the materials, sets, building, and filming spaces, so studio energy consumption.
And on the bigger side, you can also see a couple of different mediums. And we wanted to show you this, even though it doesn't have a documentary per se pie chart, but it does have the unscripted. But it correlates what Judith said about air travel being one of the biggest factors in your carbon emission. And also As we know, some documentaries can be very different from the other one, but often you can utilize animation that basically takes up a lot of servers, as she was saying as well. You can work with archives, so digitalization is a really big issue, and that hasn't been really discovered in the carbon calculators as well. So that's something we need to improve on further in the future, how to like look at the whole life cycle of everything. Because, for example, our job, just to put it in context, we work on production and we come on board in the prep stage and we leave at rep. So it doesn't look at script stage, it doesn't look at distribution, it doesn't look at post-production. So we're missing a lot of the life cycle here. And it's important to note, because your filmmaking experience will be different to ours, but you can think about the same questions and can think about the same emitters in this case. If you're traveling, what you're using, all the computers you're using, all the utilities. So we thought we'll mention this. I'm just gonna jump through to the next slide, Julia, if that's okay. And
yeah,
not moving. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, it's moving now. Can you see it? Okay.
Yeah, it's actually the same example Judith just said, but with different ones. So it's just like the average carbon emission of a tentpole movie, it's 2,840 tons, and it's like 6 times moon travel, 6 times back and forth. So it's different than the household example.
We like a little sci-fi example sometimes. This is just something that we share sometimes with the studios when we're working with them, and we thought it might be interesting to you as well, depending on what kind of story you're working on. It's more on the practical side. So at the beginning, when we join a production, we usually put together a budget based on crew numbers, location days, studio days, you know, all the parameters. We put together a waste management system, whether that's recycling, composting, or something else. Energy management, so we're trying to look at renewable energy, looking at utilities, how you can gather all the data. It's also very important that there are some things in different regions that you can change and some things you can't, but you can always measure. So even if we can't change the studio's entire system and swap them to renewable energy where we're shooting, or even if like we're shooting at 15 different locations, we're trying to get an estimated figure of the energy usage and all of that. And also looking at vendors and communicating with the crew. So no matter how small your crew is, if you're sending the message early on and you conveying this ethos of we're going to be sustainably minded, we're going to take care of sets, we're going to take care of computers and everything, that from the get-go there will be a different attitude towards sustainability, and perhaps it will spark some ideas as well that you can use later on. In our case, we usually use Speech and Pair, which is a carbon calculator, and Albert, which is a UK one. In your case, it might be very different. So these are just a couple of examples.
And I think we only have like 2 minutes left. So we just wanted to introduce one case study for you. Like we did recycling, and with all the location is not that easy, and to build out a place in the studio. We put together a chart for 6 weeks. So we collected all the balance sheets from the production and put together, always communicated with the crew, like how much they collected. We also we also made a hand selection, so to reduce all the communal waste and have clear recycling waste. And
now, this works quite well when you have a studio base, or when you're staying at the same location, but when you're very mobile, you have to come up with a different kind of system that fits your agenda. Basically, I'm just scrolling up so you can see the waste garden that we built it out there. It could stay there for 6 months, but in your case, it might be that you're just looking up recycling facilities, or if you're in a city and there are like public recycling islands, something like you collect it and you take it there at the end of the day. That can work as well. And you just estimate your waste. But it's always important to know a little bit about, so for example, landfill is the worst, incineration is slightly better, recycling is the best, but always check the company who recycles. So just a little bit about the knowledge behind it, and kind of have someone on the crew who's interested and educates themselves and looks out for the news and, you know, that kind of stuff, the practical knowledge of every day. And also, this is what we do behind the screen, but you guys are working on the screen as well, so your message gets out there a lot. So this is a double act, basically. I don't know if we have any time left, but it says 10 minutes now. So otherwise, we had a couple of case studies on energy management and communication. But I'm just going to scroll to the end. And maybe we can talk about these questions later when we get to the question sides.
Yeah, I think we're going to have some time in the end to jump back into it. And we could also share them in the chat if you'd like. Thank you so much. So moving to last but not least, Alberto from Trentino Film Commission, who will talk to us a little bit more about the role of public institutions and their responsibility in accelerating sustainability and fostering it, as well as more specifically what Trentino Film Commission has done on that front so far.
Okay, thank you, Emma. I hope you can hear me. Thank you for the invitation. I am Alberto Battocchi. I work at Trentino Film Commission, which is both a film fund and a film commission in the north of Italy. And we are a public institution. We are one office of the regional government. And this is why I'm gonna introduce start my presentation by explaining what we believe that public institutions should do when handling and when talking about sustainability in the audiovisual system, in the audiovisual industry. First of all, I think that regional and public institutions working in the AV sector should basically transpose what the national and European directives concerning sustainability and ecology, to transpose these directives to the audiovisual sector, and developing policies that could help producer and support producer and push them toward the green transition, but not only producers. I think also all the other entities belonging to the audiovisual supply chain. Second, what institutions like us can do is to use their power, economic power, but also persuasion power, in order to speed up the change. And third, what we can do is to closely collaborate with other institutions, locally, nationally, and at international level, to share best practices and find common grounds. Yeah. So our commitment towards sustainability started back in 2016, when we decided to, we noticed that all the film productions that came to our region left a footprint. Back then, not many were talking about carbon footprint, but we saw that film production in our region had an impact, and so since we live in a region where we care a lot about nature, we are in the middle of the Alps. We have a lot of mountains, beautiful lakes, and so we thought that we could do our part to reduce the impact of film productions on our environment. So back then, at the political level, institutions started talking about sustainability, but we did what we did in our small area was to come up with an idea. We decided to partner up with the local environmental protection agency, the real experts about sustainability and the environment here in Trentino, and we come up with a tool which is a manual and a checklist that was designed to give producers practical indication about how they could reduce the impact on the environment when working on their projects. But we thought that practical guidelines are a good starting point, but we need something more, because we wanted to foster the green transition using our economic power, like the incentives that we regularly do to support film productions. We want to give specific incentives to producers who embrace the green choice. But since we are talking about public funds, we thought that it was important to have a well-recognized and solid certification that could state that producers, when they commit to respect the environment, they actually do what they plan. Because if we decided to price them with some incentives, we want to be sure that they deserve the incentives that we promised them. And third, we started locally, but very soon we noticed that we could not do that on our own, because our approach is something, since it is something that originated from a public institution and basically has a very small cost on producers and on the other entities involved, we thought that it would be worth sharing it with other film commissions, film funds, and institutions in the AV sector in Italy and in Europe and worldwide, because also we are pretty sure that working together we can come up with more ideas. And we believe in the power of networking between institutions and all the entities in the supply chain. So also for what concerns training activities, if we want to spread this attitude and our perspective, I think we have to do it together. Green Film, the project we launched in 2017, and that we started sharing with other film commissions, film funds, and institutions around Europe, has three goals. Basically, the first one is to provide producers with concrete actions. We believe that what is more important is to give producers very concrete directions, because we all know that producers are very busy when going into productions, and it is difficult, especially if when someone is not used to think about sustainability, to allocate some space in their mind for an additional task, which is planning sustainability. A second goal is a broader goal, is to on the long run to change producers' mindset, so that producers, even before starting, even before checking if there are any incentives, or even if there are instruments that could support their path towards sustainability, they already make choices on their own. Yeah. And our third goal is to collect data through an activity, a side activity that we launched last year, thanks to funding that we got from the Italian ministry. We started to measure the amount of CO2 reduction connected to the implementation of our rating system and our certification. So, as I said, we started with a very low-level, hands-on approach that was aimed at changing the working practice of producers. From the beginning, we had a very good response, and much higher than our expectations, and producers started asking for certification, and so we are very happy with that. But we think that while at the moment our certification and our rating system, at the beginning it was developed specifically or mainly thinking about feature films and TV series, we had to do something specific for documentary productions, because as we said, as Tim said, and we all know that the working practice of documentary production is different. We know that documentaries already have a reduced impact on the environment compared to the production of TV series and feature films. But however, it is still important to change producers' habits and support docs producers in doing what they actually can do working on documentaries. And third, since many national and regional funds are now giving incentives and support to producers who are willing to apply green measures to their work, also documentary producers should be able to have access to these measures. So dedicated tools should be developed. What we did is to partner up with DocIT, which is the National Association of Documentary Producers in Italy, and to come up with a specific version of green film, of our instrument, dedicated to documentaries. Because we know that in doc production, companies are small, sometimes it's difficult to identify a film set to focus on when you are targeting the reduction of consumptions and all the ways to produce. Production budgets are very lower than those in feature films, and shooting schedules, as you know, are fragmented, crews are small, and last but not least, in documentary productions, editing and post-production sometimes have a very considerable weight, like in percentage in terms of time and human resources, because in documentary it goes that way. So what we are doing at the moment is to come up with a doc-tailored version of green film, of our green film rating system, specifically designed for documentaries. The criteria, the areas we are focusing on are very basic, very similar to many of other projects the same areas that are tackled by other initiatives, and which is basically energy saving, transport accommodation, catering and beverages, waste management, and communication. And as a reference, you can take the current version of green film, which is available on our website, which is www.green.film. And where are we at the moment? We are testing the trial version of green film with an Italian documentary production. And we are expecting to collect feedback and by April and May, and publish the new tool dedicated to documentaries in June of this year, and make it available for free to other to institutions and producers. And last, I would like to remind that the Green Film Doc instrument will be a functional tool for the certification of international co-productions, also in documentaries. So I think I talked a bit more than I should, and this is an overview of the partners that are involved in our projects, and I'm happily available for questions later on. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. Before we open the question, the panel to audience questions, which we will have also from online but in person, I had a first question to address to the panelists. Before I ask it, I will just introduce the topic that it's under. The idea of sustainability, it's a word that we often find linked to environmental issues. In fact, a definition that we can find online, especially in terms of the United Nations, is that it has three pillars. One is economic, the other is environmental, and the other is social. And we did touch upon the environmental aspect of sustainability and the economic to certain degrees, but we haven't really addressed the social aspect, which concerns issues that deal with the universality of human rights and allowing inclusion and diversity across all industries and communities. So a first question that I had for the panelists was, is there a distinction between green productions and sustainable productions? Whoever wants to go first can.
Actually, I think green production, it also contains sustainable production. So for example, we are always looking at the sustainable parts when we are choosing a vendor. So I just mentioned in our presentation, the vendor who is doing a waste hand selection thing. And this vendor is using actually people who are getting reintegrated from the society. So it's always important to see also the sustainable part. So human reintegration, it's one of us.
Just like Tim showed the SDG goals, so we can't really separate one SDG goal and just focus on that. There's all of them that we have to take care.
Can I just give an example from what I'm working on right now? So I'm working with the Dutch Film Funds or the Netherlands Film Funds, and the idea is to implement sustainability measures, and in that sense, it is really green. So like how to produce in a more environmentally friendly way. And so what I see there, I would say there is a big difference, like really on the ground, because, you know, the colleagues there, they think about inclusion and diversity, which is like one dossier. So some people take care of this and other people take care of the green aspect. So there seems to be a difference in the thinking of people. And what I also realized, so if I think about social sustainability, this is for example, also about work conditions, right? So labor conditions and all these things. And so what I see is that the problem of implementing green measures has to do with unsustainable ways of working in the film industry. Everybody is under a lot of pressure, doesn't have any time to think. So it's really, there is a relation to it, right? But like it is somehow handled separately, which I find really interesting to look at it from the outside and also from an analytical perspective, I have to say.
Okay, thank you. And one last question before I open it up to the audience concerns the idea, a question or a problem, I guess, that I've heard from a lot of people who say, how is it more affordable to have a green production? Isn't it more expensive? And that's a question, again, for everyone, whoever wants to jump in first. Talking about the cost of, you know, non-sustainable productions versus sustainable.
I'll give some examples from Flanders. And I agree, in some cases, other innovative choices, they have extra costs and they will have an effect on budget. But what I also see is that in many cases, the best solutions are just using your brain and about reducing, because if you don't need energy, you don't need to find a fancy generator or an alternative battery pack. So it's about prevention. And I have some great examples, like we had a project from the Flemish broadcaster VRT, and they had a 73-day production process. And instead of using a generator, they had a temporal connection to the main electricity grid, the power grid from the city. And by having that, they reduced their budget with 20,000 euro and a lot of CO2. It was like 30 tons of CO2 less by not using a generator. So it's by being creative in your choices and by looking at other options and being innovative in decision making, you can make a big difference. The same production, they had a deal with a local school and they could park the production vehicles at night at a schoolyard in a protective area. That way, during the 70 days, they didn't drive 43,000 kilometers with their trucks. Again, that's 40,000 euro more on your budget. So it's not always about having fancy, expensive solutions. It's also about just using your brain and think about the reasons why you spend money on choices.
Yes, Alberto.
Yeah, I'm connect to what Tim was saying, that I think that from our experience, what matters a lot is planning. If you plan your productions with a green mindset well ahead, and this is something we keep repeating to the producers that are certifying films with us, is that planning is crucial. And this is why we, in our rating system, planning sustainability in terms of analyzing all the things that producer can actually do for make their set less to reduce the impact of their set on the environment, and also the transportation that plan that they develop. These two things are mandatory, and planning well ahead is very important. When producers plan ahead their sustainability strategy, also costs are reduced.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple of questions from viewers online, but first I want to... Oh, sorry. Sorry, I didn't see you, Zsofia, over there. Did you want to say something, to add something?
Yes, sorry, but I saw Judith's hand is up as well. I just realized later.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Okay, so I just want to second what Alberto says, that planning is so important, because our big bugbear is basically, if we could get the script, we could help at script stage. And with Judith and Julia, we talked a lot about this, is actually that if we can plan ahead in terms of the schedule, where you're going to build your stages, you can plan not just like what you're building, but where you're going. So you can plan your travel as well, and everything is connected. So all the departments are connected to each other. So if everyone thinks in a sustainable mindset, then you saved money already, basically. So that's a big deal. And when we're on set, it's almost like, you know, you're bleeding and you just put a patch on it. So it's nothing more than that. Like, you have to plan way earlier than that. So the kind of costs we're saving on set are minuscule. We're saving on recycled paper, we're saving on water, we can save on energy if the production allows it, that we turn off the generators. But wouldn't it be better not to use a generator? But you can only do that if you plan ahead. So that's yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
And maybe to just jump in, because I'm really curious, and maybe this is a question to the filmmakers in the room somewhere there, because I'm really curious about documentary filmmaking in how much it is possible to plan ahead. Of course, it depends on the topic you're filming and so on and so on. So I'm really wondering if the things that we are kind of preaching, it's all about planning and so on and so on, how that works with documentary filmmaking. I'm pretty sure that Alberto knows a lot about that, but I would also be curious to hear from Filmmaker what they think, if that works, how that works.
Did anybody from the audience want to tackle that? We have a mic. If you want to speak, just raise your hand. Okay. So I would open it up to the audience we have in person first, and then jump to a couple of questions we have online. If anyone wants the microphone, just please raise your hand. Okay, so let's go for a bit to the question we have online. So we have one question from C Films, and this is for all panelists. So what about the concerns, this is for regarding rating systems. It says, what about the concerns these rating systems raise? Will the productions be rated somehow? Meaning, if they're not green enough, does this mean they will not have the go-ahead from a quote-unquote committee? Maybe Tim or Alberto, you want to jump in first, but it's open to everybody.
Tim, if I can answer the question, I would say that at the moment, the situation, at least in Europe, is that instead of having not green productions, having their restricted access to funding or other kind of incentives, is the opposite. Like national film funds, regional film funds, and other institutions are prizing producers that are applying green measures to their projects. But I think that on the long run, when green measures will become an established thing among producers, institutions might become stricter, as it happened to other industrial sector in the past years.
In Flanders, in Belgium, for us, sustainability is not a part of the evaluation process when people apply a project at the fund. We look at the quality of the project, and we have commissions and juries looking at that from the content size. And only when a project is approved by these commissions, then I step in. And for me, it's not a cherry on the cake. It's about a commitment and about, let's call it a new normal. And every film is different, every project is different. So we try to, and I'm somehow the knowledge hub in Flanders, and I try to translate it for every project separately. But we don't give any extra cash or extra things. But for me, and it comes to the discussion, when can you say that a project is sustainable? For me, it's about the commitment that the producer and the cast and crew take it serious and really dig into every department, because it's not only about cleaning up once you're finished, it's really about engaging everybody in the team to think about, okay, I'm the gaffer, what can I do? I'm the set construction team, what can I do? How much freedom do I have? How much mental freedom I have and time to plan? So for me, it's about that commitment and not about a number, because the content is so different. So you can already say that an international production that has to travel around will have a high impact, whilst a small project regionally will have low impact. That is pure mathematics. I can already put a number on it if I want. It's much more about the commitment and how serious you take it.
Thank you for that. Anybody from the audience? Oh, we have a question. Could you hold your hand up, please, so that the mic comes to you? Thank you.
Hi, my name is Maria Rabazzolo, and I work for the Greek cash rebate and tax relief schemes for ECOME. It was not very clear to me. I wanted to ask the gentleman from Trentino and Tim here, how far into their national law is sustainability applied, and how willing are the politicians to listen to suggestions of implementing actually sustainability into the law, either film law, film commission law, or any kind of law that has to do with economics and investment. Thank you.
I can, thank you for the question. I think it's, I can provide the Italian experience. When telling about the path that we took, we started as a, since we are a regional fund, we started with a measure, an incentive, and a regulation that was applied locally. Then we decided to share this initiative with other regions in Italy, and at some point we saw that it was important to have an acknowledgement at the ministerial level. And here we are talking about two different ministries in Italy. One is the Ministry of Culture, and the other one, of course, is the Ministry of Environment. I think for the last two years, the Ministry of Culture started inserting in their calls for funding additional points, additional evaluation points to films that could provide a green certification. And but as I said during my presentation, it was also important to set what, since we are talking about public money, that the certification that were asked by the Ministry of Culture could be reliable. So what we did is to get in touch through our Environmental Protection Agency with the Ministry of Environment and make them evaluate our protocol, and basically green film become a recognized instrument for certification of films nationwide in Italy, and that's why also the Ministry of Culture has now a reference, an instrument for giving incentives to sustainable films. I hope I answered your question.
Sure, go
In
ahead.
in Belgium, we had a laugh about it yesterday evening at a table. We have a very complex political structure. So I represented the Flemish fund. We have a fund for Wallonia and Brussels, and in our company in WAF we have two funds. We have a cultural fund, which depends on the Minister of Culture, and we have an economic fund with another minister. For the cultural fund, we had the freedom to develop our own regulations, and we say, okay, public money being spent in the public cultural fund, there's a formal obligation to work on sustainability. We are now at the moment looking with the commercial fund, the economic fund, if we can have the same logic. But when we started, that minister was like, they saw the chance that productions might not come to Flanders due to extra regulations. But now we are looking at, can we fine-tune our modus operandi in Flanders? But we're also talking to other funds in Belgium, with Brussels, Wallonia, and also at European level to see, shouldn't we strive towards one European approach? So when you travel around and you have a co-production, that the same logic is used everywhere around Europe, and that we all agree that sustainability is the same thing, and that we also think about how funding works. And at EFAT is the Federation of European Federation of National Film Funds. There, one of the questions added was, shouldn't we think about how film funding works and how we can make sure that everybody who funds strives towards the same goal? And when I look at tax rebate in Belgium, it's federal, and there, for instance, sets have to be destroyed at the end of a project, because if there's a residual value, it is reduced from your budget. So in a way, there are financial rules which are not always hyper pro sustainability. So I think it's a discussion to have in regions, but also at European level. And what you see now also at European level, with Urimage looking at funding, creative media looking at their funding schemes, more and more it's set on the European agenda. And I think that it's very important that we see the opportunity at European level, but we also make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel locally. Because I think that I had a talk this morning with the people representing the Thessaloniki Film Institute. They play a vital local role, because they can host teams locally and find local solutions for global problems. So I think that it's really a joint effort on all the different institutions.
We have another audience member who wants to ask a question. Could you raise your hand, please? Thank you.
Thank you. We were having a conversation. I represent the Film Office Central Macedonia. This is the regional film office based here in Thessaloniki. And I would like to address the question to everyone in the panel, whoever wants to answer. And I would like to ask, what can a film office, a regional film office, do in terms of promoting this green filming, if it doesn't have the jurisdictions to give funding? I mean, apart from funding, what else can a film office do? And what's the first step? Because here in Greece, green filming is not a common practice. We're starting from almost zero, so it's something that we have to promote. We have to change the mindset somehow and to follow the right steps. So I'm asking, what's the best practice? What can we do here? Thank you.
I think this is a great question, and I would actually like, because we're kind of a little tight on time, just to, it would be wonderful if everyone briefly touched on it and just gave their opinion on what's a good approach, how to start. Thank you.
I will start. I think you have a vital role. And do you remember the A-Team, that 80s TV series? I think that you're the problem solver, because you know your region, you know the needs of productions. And I think that somehow you can balance sustainability, these logistic needs, and solutions regionally. The examples on maybe you can help productions to find a place where they can find second-hand stuff or repurposed wood, or where they can donate residual set decoration, etc. So I think that that local role, you don't have to be the scientist or the specialist, you just have to be the ambassador.
Yeah, I also agree with Tim, and I think that creating, giving producers information about suppliers and that regionally can offer products and services that can are connected with green production. It's a good first step. And second, I think that entering networks like the one we built for working together in order to develop green policies at a broader level, at the European level, exchanging ideas, and also training activities is something that could be beneficial, also because it's basically for free. No, that's any costs attached.
Should I just answer from the Dutch perspective? This is a very good question, because this is what I'm interested in as well. So as university, we are trying to help the Dutch film funds to stimulate more sustainable film production. And it turns out that in the end, you need a few people, one person per crew, as Zsofia said, who inspires the whole crew and who knows a lot of resources where, suppliers and all these things that was already mentioned. So I would say find 2 or 3 people who are willing to do that work and send them to Trentino to get a training. And that is already a great step, I would say.
I just wanted to chime in because we mainly work in Hungary at the moment, so the Central Eastern European field, and there wasn't much sustainability in terms of filmmaking here before we started. But we started working with the National Film Fund, and they were very open to it, and they were also asking the questions, what can you do? And from our perspective, being on set, any kind of support helps. So the NFV published a policy in English and in Hungarian, so they can support both the domestic and the mobile productions coming here, which is very helpful because you can refer to it if you, for example, a smaller production, you don't have the background, you haven't had any trainings. But we're also working on some incubator programs with them, because I think almost like loads of funds, they have these new incubator funds for filmmakers that they do their first features. Like in the UK, there's iFeature, or in Hungary, we've got this incubator thing, and we kind of like help them because our job, so we're consultants and we're sometimes on set, sometimes we just consult a company. So we try and go and help them to basically how to make their first film greener, because that's a good start, because they're the future of the filmmaking here in the country. So right, so if you teach them now, then maybe later on they will employ all these things that they learned. And yeah, basically trying to give hope and inspire people, but we can only do that with education. We're happy to talk to you as well anytime, so if you want to reach out to us, you've got our emails. So yeah,
maybe I want to add to the discussion. There's also another very vital role, because we can talk about the broad approach of sustainability, but as a regional office, you know your region very good. And I see examples like in Sardinia or Mallorca, where the regional film offices, they really push and develop it on the regional scale. And like in Sardinia, it's also about protection of the island, because it's so specific that you need somebody local to translate it into how to use water, where to find energy, and really have that local focus. It can be about nature conservation in Sweden or about heritage conservation in Scotland. So it's not only about CO2. It's very, locally focused.
Thank you. What I take away from it as a person who's on the creative front as a filmmaker is when I started asking all these questions myself and talking to friends of mine who are filmmakers or creatives from other industries about what about climate change and what is our responsibility as people who belong to an industry to do things right, at least not do them wrong. One thing that I have taken away from it, and I also take away from this conversation, is that I initially had this idea that there's one way to do it right. You either do have a green production or you don't. You either do it right 100% or you don't. But the most useful thing personally and in the sort of collaboration teams that I've worked with is understanding that the important thing as a step one is to have these conversations and to raise awareness. And from then on, it's a step-by-step process very often, and it can move slow on a grander scale of things, but on an individual front and in small communities of collaboration, there's a lot that we can do. And that is already much better than not doing anything on the matter. I don't believe we have time for other questions, but there's one point I wanted to touch on, that there's actually two projects that I just wanted to spotlight for a second. One is the Green Film Lab that Torino Film Lab is hosting, which is taking place this summer, and it actually is training for green productions. Since this is something that has been brought up, it might be interesting for people to look at it. And the other one is actually hosted by Thessaloniki Film Festival, and it is the Evia Film Project, also to take place this summer. And it is 2 different types of workshops in collaboration with the Agora branch of the festival, which will select projects that are feature-length, live action, fiction, documentaries, and new media, focusing on the environmental crisis, either directly or indirectly. There's more information on the website of the Thessaloniki Film Festival. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the panelists and to the audience for being here today. Mm-hmm.